What are the origin stories of every GTA protagonist? Each of them come from vastly different backgrounds with different reasons for turning to a life of crime, and each with their own motivations and goals. Today I'll talk about the events prior to their individual game and try to understand them more as characters. Let's begin. Up first we have our boy Claude from GTA 3, who's probably the most secretive protagonist out of them all. And it's not like he could really open up to anyone either. We do know at least some of the things he's done prior to and after meeting Catalina in 1992 thanks to GTA San Andreas. He used to be a top-line racer in an underground ring, and he used to own a garage in Doherty, San Fierro before he gave it away to CJ, losing it in the race around the countryside. After giving away his property, him and Catalina left San Andreas for good, going on a 9-year-long robbery spree around the country, going as far as Texas and New Mexico before settling for Liberty City. And at some point, before they ended up hitting the bank of Liberty City, they became involved with the Colombian cartel, which assisted them in this robbery as the crew was formed by 4 members. Claude, Catalina, Miguel, who served as the getaway driver, and an unknown Colombian member who's also shot and killed by Catalina. And the rest, well, we know what happens next. Unlike Claude, whose background is relatively unknown, Tommy's history before the events of Vice City is quite clear and impressive. We know he was born in 1951, and during his childhood he used to help his father clean the rollers in a printing shop he worked in, with his initial plans being to follow his father's footsteps. However, he ended up falling in with the Forellis sometime later, living a totally different life than he expected. And he quickly started to get a name for himself on the streets of Liberty City, which led to his boss, Sonny Forelli, becoming anxious about what Tommy could be planning to do next, considering he was a capable guy. So in 1971, Sonny sent him to supposedly do a hit on someone in Harwood, but instead he was set up in an ambush where he was met by 11 hitmen, all which were taken out by Tommy. All at the age of only 20 years old, which is really impressive. He then got sentenced to life in prison, but fearing he might end up ratting the Forellis out, Sonny pulled some strings to reduce Tommy's sentence to only 15 years, which he served all the way through. After being released, also fearing that Tommy's return to the streets of Liberty might be bad for business, and with plans to expand their operations down south in Vice City, Sonny sends the Protagonist there to do a deal for 20 keys, and also to just set up things down there for the Forellis to come later. And again, the rest is history. Next up is Carl Johnson. He was born somewhere around the late 1960s, presumably in 1968, to his mother Beverly Johnson, along with the other 3 Johnson siblings, those being Sweet, Kendall, and Brian, and his father, whom he never met. Some in-game dialogue suggests that old Reese did know CJ's father and that he somewhat resembles him. But again, since he was never around, Sweet, or rather his real name Sean, was the man of the house, making CJ's life miserable for the most part. During childhood, he also met up with Lance Wilson, aka Ryder, and Melvin Harris, aka Big Smoke, and along with Sweet, the 4 of them became best friends. At some point, Sweet became leader of the Grove Street families, introducing CJ to the gang life. In 1985, during the height of their power, the gang attracted the attention of Tenpenny, who began pressuring them, and soon after, their power and influence started to gradually decline. Around 1987 is when Brian Johnson, the other brother of CJ, died, with him witnessing it but presumably not doing anything to help him, which made Sweet resent him, and soon after, CJ fled to Liberty City, where he spent the next 5 years doing small-time crimes, and he even ended up working for Joey Leone, the son of Salvatore. After hearing of his mother's death from Sweet, CJ decides to visit Los Santos but ends up staying there for good, and again, we all know the rest. Another rather mysterious character would be Mike from GTA Advance. We don't know his last name, but fortunately we have more knowledge about his background than we have for Claude. Mike was a homeless kid living on the streets of Liberty City and barely scraping by until one day when he was found by Vinny, who took him under his wing and became his mentor, with the 2 of them becoming best friends and working for various mob families of Liberty City. Mike's initial plan was to leave the city after he earned quite a bit of money, but Vinny insisted on doing a few more jobs before leaving for good, which we do, and after a few missions, later Vinny is apparently killed in a car bomb. We then go on a quest to find Vinny's killer and earn back the money that was lost with him in the explosion. Quite a brief background when compared to other characters. Up next is Tony Cipriani, who was born to Mrs. Cipriani and an unnamed father who was also a mob guy similar to Tony, and at some point Tony's father was killed by the Triads. After which, his mother started to put a lot of pressure on Tony's shoulders to live up to his father's legacy, who was a real man in her eyes. and he followed the same path, joining the Leones sometime prior to 1998. Tony then left Liberty City, needing to lie low after killing a highly ranked maidman from a rival family, presumably a capo, as a favor for Salvatore, returning in 1998 to continue working for him. Next is Victor Vance. We also don't know much about his past, similar to other protagonists so far. However, Victor mentions that his father came from the Dominican Republic to the United States and eventually meeting his mother. His father's fate is unknown, with the assumption that he died, leaving the three Vance brothers, Victor, Lance, and Pete, under the care of their aunt Enid as their mother neglected them and became a drug addict. Pete suffers from asthma, prompting Vic, who acted as the man of the house despite not being the oldest, to enroll in the US Army, rising up to the rank of corporal and getting transferred to Fort Baxter, the military base located in Vice City. Up next is Niko Bellic. Niko was born in Yugoslavia in 1978. His father was an abusive alcoholic and his mother, Milica Bellic, was unhappy that her son grew up in those conditions. Niko reveals that he had a brother who died during the Yugoslav wars. And according to some in-game dialogue, Niko dreamed of becoming an astronaut when he was a child. Niko also mentions that a house he grew up in did not have electricity until he was 12. He was also a teenage soldier fighting in the Yugoslav wars, which started in 1991, making him only 13 years old at the time. He served as a helicopter pilot and an infantryman during the war. Niko witnessed and committed various atrocities, which led to his cynical perspective on life and a certain degree of regret, depression, and emotional detachment. Eventually, Niko's unit of 15 men were ambushed by enemy forces, but Darko Brevic, Florian Kravic, and himself survived. Niko concluded that either Florian or Darko had sold him out, and he swore to find and kill the traitor. He then had trouble finding work after the war, so he spent the next decade working in the European criminal underworld, leading to a period of incarceration in a European penitentiary. After his release from prison, he began working for a human trafficking ring led by Ray Bulgarin. When a boat involved in the operation sank in the Adriatic Sea during a smuggling run into Italy, Niko swam to save his life, which made Bulgarin believe that Niko had intentionally screwed him over and stole his money. So he spent the next 7 months on the cargo ship Platypus, which eventually smuggled him into Liberty City. Let's move on to Johnny Klebitz. Johnny was born in 1974 in Actor Alderney, and he has an older brother named Michael Klebitz, who used to be friends with Billy Gray when Johnny was only 10 years old. Michael is a soldier serving in Iraq, and he constantly criticizes Johnny's biker lifestyle and association with Billy. And according to Billy, it was him who initiated a young Johnny into the Lost MC. Johnny's criminal records shows rigorous activity between 1991 and 1994, when Johnny would have been around 17 to 20. He was put in prison soon after, and he had a parole violation in 2000, meaning he did up to 6 years. At some point he met Ashley Butler, whom he used to date, but he ended the relationship with her due to the affair with Billy, as well as her drug addiction, which Johnny believes ruined her life. Despite this, he is shown to still care about Ashley and will do anything to protect her. Moving on, let's talk about Luis Lopez. Luis is of Dominican descent and was raised in Northwood, Algonquin. His mother is Adriana Lopez, and he also has 2 other siblings, his older brother Ernesto and his younger sister Lera Lopez Wilkinson. His father was a US Marine who abandoned them while they were young. He was raised by his mother, who also had a notable role in the upbringing of Luis's childhood best friends, Armando and Enrique. Luis also grew up with Oscar and Alonso Gomez, Teddy Benavides, and Willie Valerio, who talked most of the neighborhood kids into dealing drugs. In 2000, when Luis was 17, he was sent to juvenile hall because he shot and injured a teacher who felt up his sister. In 2001, he was arrested again for Grand Theft Auto, wink wink, and he went to prison. During this period of about 2 years, he went from being very skinny to being quite muscular, building up his physique to avoid being attacked by other inmates. By this time, his brother and sister had both left Liberty City and started families. As a result, Luis became their mother's primary source of income. In 2005, when Luis was 22, his life changed when he accepted a job from nightclub owner Tony Prince as his bodyguard, and the duo quickly built a father-son bond. By working for Tony, he lost respect from old friends who saw him as a yuppie. Tony also once paid Luis to take helicopter flying lessons and advanced driving. Up next, we have Huang Li. Huang was born in Hong Kong, China in 1983. He is a rich kid, son of a triad leader who, for most of his life, never had to solve any problem himself, with his fortune always getting him out of trouble. However, Huang's life completely changed after his father was murdered in 2009. Huang travels to Liberty City to deliver the Yu Jian sword, a family heirloom, to Huang's uncle Wu Kenny Li. Upon arrival, Huang is attacked by unknown assassins who steal the sword and leave him for dead. Thus begins Huang's quest to find those responsible for Yu Jian's theft and his father's murder, which leads him to become heavily involved with the Liberty City underworld. According to Huang, he has previously visited Liberty City at least once before 2009, but during his previous visit, he caught crabs after an encounter with a Swiss tourist. Now let's move on to Michael DeSanta, or actually Michael Townley. Michael was born in either 1965 or 1968 in the Midwest, and he grew up in a trailer park with his parents. Michael grew up with an alcoholic and physically abusive father who later abandoned him. In his high school years, Michael was an acclaimed quarterback for an all-state football team. However, his anger issues and constant injuries ultimately forced him to quit. He then turned to a life of crime, getting imprisoned twice by the time he was 20. He committed his first robbery in 1998, where he managed to steal $10,000 on the outskirts of Carcer City. During this period, he associated himself with Lester Crest, who would later assist Michael in planning out a series of heists. Michael met Trevor while escorting cargo across the border. After noticing how well they worked together, Michael brought Trevor under his wing as a partner for various crimes he would commit, and they were both somewhat successful in their profession. A few years later, Trevor met a crook named Brad Snyder and introduced him to Michael. In 1991, Michael, Trevor, and Brad went to a strip club where they met a stripper named Amanda. Though she initially took a liking to Brad, she eventually came on to Michael. After a few months of dating, Michael married Amanda and had 2 children, Tracy and Jimmy. At some point in 2004, Michael met corrupt FIB agent Dave Norton and made an agreement to cut ties with Trevor and Brad in exchange for the ability to disappear and start a new life. By paying Dave a monthly 5-figure amount, he would relocate Michael and his family to Los Santos and provide them with new identities to start over. Upon the relocation, Michael and his family moved into a mansion in Rockford Hills using the new surname DeSanta. Let's move on to Franklin Clinton. Franklin was born in South Los Santos in 1988. He never knew his father, and his mother became a coke addict when Franklin was very young. His mother's addiction eventually led to her death when Franklin was a little boy. Following his mother's death, he moved in with his maternal grandparents. Franklin then decided to become a street hustler. After the death of his grandparents, Franklin and his aunt Denise moved into a house on Forum Drive, left to them by Franklin's grandmother in her will. Franklin attended Davis High School along with Lamar Davis, Tanisha Jackson, and Tanya, but was expelled for assaulting a teacher. Around this time, he began the life of a gangbanger and dope dealer and started committing various petty crimes, such as carjackings and small-time bank robberies with Lamar. During their first bank robbery, they stole $2,000 but could not keep the money because a dye pack exploded, making it worthless. Franklin's life of petty crime eventually caught up with him in 2008 at the age of 20, when he was arrested and sent to prison. At some point, Franklin dated Tanisha, but they split up due to her brother's death. In 2013, Franklin moved beyond the role of a street dealer when he and Lamar began working for Simeon Yetarian, who owns a car dealership, acting as a front for loan sharking and extortion. And finally, let's talk about the man himself, Trevor Phillips. Trevor was born and raised in Canada near the border with the United States, and in his own words, he grew up in 5 states, 2 countries, in 14 different homes, 3 care homes, 2 correctional facilities with 8 fathers and 1 beautiful damaged flower of a mother. Trevor's childhood itself was an unhappy one. His father was physically abusive towards him, while his mother was emotionally abusive, treated him with condescension, and saw him as a useless boy. When he was a child, Trevor's father abandoned him in a shopping mall, which Trevor later burned down in retaliation. Trevor also had a brother named Ryan, whom he was never fond of, and Ryan died in an accident prior to 2013. Trevor also dropped out of school, which explains why he has a lack of some basic knowledge. Later in his life, Trevor discovered that he had a talent for flying jets. He enlisted in the Air Force to fly fighter jets, but several days prior to completing his training and becoming a licensed pilot, Trevor was deemed mentally unstable by the Psychological Evaluations Board. After being discharged from the military, Trevor became a drifter and committed petty crimes along the border with no particular goal in mind. He never committed any serious crimes until he met Michael Townley around age 20. In 2012, Trevor met Wade and his group of friends, which he presumably killed at a nearby quarry. And there you have it, the backstory of every GTA protagonist. Of course, this doesn't include every single detail of their backstories, but just a general overview of their background. Whose origin story was the most interesting in your opinion? Let me know in the comment section down below. And while you're there, also leave a like. And of course, consider subscribing if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching.